Evening. How's everybody? I'll wait a little seconds here, a couple of seconds. How's it going? This is a last second live discussion. I was reminded by a friend of mine who's going to be here, Ecom, um, regarding a live discussion. I've forgotten all about it. Just I said I was going to do one Friday, and so I want to live up to that. And yeah, I totally forgot all about it. But I had something I did want to talk about, which was the National Security Agency, the one agency that was relatively ignored by the 9/11 Commission and the Joint House inquiry regarding signals intelligence monitoring of Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda. Um, and so I want to talk about that for a bit. I also want to talk about the NSA's programs that they were running in the mid 90s in a program that uh, superseded it, which was a failure after the September 11 attacks. But how did the NSA begin monitoring Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda? Well, we have to return to the summer of 1996. Ziyad Khaleel, a little bit about Ziyad. Um, he was an alleged member of Al Qaeda living inside the United States, uh, lived in a number of states: Colorado, Florida, Missouri. And he was identified as a procurement agent for Osama bin Laden in the mid 90s, in which he would deliver computers like telephones, computers, surveillance equipment, in which he can't get while he's in Afghanistan. Uh, Due to the fact that his bookkeeper and financier, um, Wadi al Hajj, had been arrested in Khartoum for his connections with the East Africa bombings. Later, he relied on others to get him things that were available inside the United States. Wadi al Hajj had residence in Houston, Texas, and he was under investigation for being a bookkeeper for bin Laden. Um, while he was in Missouri, Ziyad Khaleel, he was a fundraiser and one of the 8 regional directors of the Islamic African Relief Agency, which was a front uh, for Al Qaeda and Hamas, a Palestinian terrorist organization. Um, he was tasked by a friend, and I'll name who the friend is, to get a satellite phone for him. And so he began looking at businesses online about a satellite phone, in which he found uh, a business in Long Island, New York, that sold an Ogara satellite phone, Ogara satellite network. The phone was approximately $7,000 at the time, so it was expensive, but it was a powerful satellite phone. And the number assigned to that phone was 873 682 505 331. However, what Khalil had not known at the time was that he was under uh, an investigation by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, for his alleged links with Hamas. And so, because of this, they found out where, good evening, where the phone was going to. And the phone was mailed to a residence in um, Missouri, and it went to the hands of a person, the friend I was talking about, Khalid al-Fawwaz. And Khalid al-Fawwaz uh, was a Saudi who was later under indictment uh, for his role in the 1998 East Africa bombings. That came a little bit later, but we're talking about 1996 right now. So Fawaz was a Saudi who had a residence in the United States, in Missouri, and he actually mailed that phone to an address in Tora Bora, Afghanistan. The FBI contacted the National Security Agency since the phone went out of the country, not their jurisdiction, but they want to know where that phone was going to, since it was part now of an impending of a current investigation. So they contacted the National Security Agency, and the NSA decrypted the phone because it was the satellite phone was a decrypted phone, wasn't encrypted. So they monitored that phone, they bugged it, and that phone went into the hands of Osama bin Laden. Now, to them, that didn't mean much. He wasn't really that known in 1996, only through the Central Intelligence Agency at the time, knew much about him. New York FBI Counterterrorism Office only knew him as a financier, not much, but when they asked for records from the CIA regarding bin Laden, they were delivering files upon files, which meant that the CIA was monitoring bin Laden for many years. So, bin Laden began using the phone almost immediately. And remember when I talked about Wadi al Hajj? Well, according to the prosecution in the trial of Wadi al Hajj, the calls went to many high profile Al Qaeda contacts and also to Khalid al Fawaz inside the United States. Now, there were more than 200 calls placed to a Yemen home in the capital of Saan'a. 100 calls each were placed to the Sudan and Iran. Around 60 calls were placed to Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Baku, Azerbaijan. 16 of those calls went to Kenya. 4 of those calls went to Wadi al Hajj's home in Nairobi, Kenya. 6 of those calls went to various locations inside the United States. And 4 calls went to Malaysia. Now, we know about Saudi Arabia, his contacts there. We know about Nairobi, Kenya, because he actually had built roads and businesses while he was in the Sudan and kept private homes for his accountants in Al Qaeda. One of them was Wadi al Hajj. Various locations inside the United States. That would be Brooklyn, New York, or Arizona. The 2 cities that had prominent offices, which were linked to the Maktab al-Khidmat, which is the Afghan Services Bureau in Pakistan. And Malaysia. Well, there was a group in Malaysia called the Jemaah Islamiyah and the Abu Sayyaf. Malaysia also had a number of business fronts that were owned by bin Laden's brother-in-law, Muhammad Jamal Khalifa, who married bin Laden's sister. And he had a number of businesses residing there. And also, he had a number of 2 prominent terrorist groups that had links to Al Qaeda. But it was the number from Yemen which caught the analysts at the NSA's attention. They found out that this home was owned by a person by the name of Ahmed al-Hada, who was an associate of Osama bin Laden during the Afghan-Soviet War in 1979. Ahmed al-Hada allegedly fought in the same ranks as bin Laden, visited his residence in Peshawar during the 80s. And so now the NSA began collecting data on the phone, incoming, receiving calls from God knows where. Later, the CIA's chief of station, Alex Station, Michael Scheuer, would go on to say that the NSA had struck a gold mine regarding signals intelligence, regarding intelligence in general. They didn't do any human intelligence or human. They did SIGINT, signals intelligence. But can you imagine, just for a second, what was talked about on that satellite phone? And this is the reason why it drives me crazy that nobody talks about the NSA. And I'll get into it later about what former NSA employees had to say about what they collected, which was ginormous. So, what were these calls about? But the agency decided to red flag this number, meaning that it was important because it kept contacting, and Bin Laden kept contacting it. The number to the Yemen home was 967 1 200578. No other agency in the world knew about this number. The NSA didn't even share it, not with the CIA or the FBI, even though this is the CIA's jurisdiction. And the FBI didn't know about this until they were the primary investigators after the 1998 East Africa bombings, in which they visited one of the suspects, Mohammed al-Halahi, while he was in a hospital treating for burns on his back, in which he ran away from a truck which exploded in in Kenya, Nairobi, Kenya. And when the FBI was speaking with him, I think it was John Antisev, he gave him that number because while he was outside the hospital, al-Halahi was actually calling somebody, and it was this number. The FBI had no idea that the NSA 2 years prior had this number because the NSA didn't tell anybody. Now, the question is, were the 1998 East Africa bombings talked about on that phone? Well, who knows? Because they're not public. But months after he was expelled from the Sudan, Bin Laden, he declared his first fatwa against the United States. But it was against the military in Riyadh, in Mecca and Medina specifically, not against civilians. And the declaration was the declaration of jihad against the Americans occupying the land of the two holiest sites. And that declaration, that fatwa, was declared on August 23rd, 1996, in which he showed his dissatisfaction for the Saudi kingdom's decision to have the kuffar, the non-believer, to stay in the most holiest site in all of Islam, Mecca and Medina. It was first published in a paper called Al-Quds al-Arabi, which is a London Arabic newspaper. So the NSA decided to build a satellite cable near Madagascar to start monitoring the Yemen home. Now, later on, the NSA would state before a Senate Select Committee that they started tapping the Yemen home in 1998. However, this is disputed because the CIA and the FBI believed that as soon as that number popped up on that satellite phone that Khaled al-Fawwaz delivered to him, that's when they started monitoring that number. That would make sense. And that was in 1996. So the NSA had voice interceptor operators, linguists, translate, transcribe, and write summaries of all the calls because they weren't encrypted. The NSA contacts the CIA in 98 and tells them that we're monitoring a house in Saan'a, Yemen. We'd like for you to do human intelligence and run the operation in which you could provide photographs of the people who were inside the house and people who were coming and going. And the CIA agreed. the deputy of the DOO, Directorate of Operations, James Pavitt, then Director George Tenet, decided to run the operation, and they were the primary organization who ran the operations at the Yemen hub. But the NSA was the primary agency for signals intelligence. So the CIA, which doesn't do signals intelligence, they decided to put a bug inside the house so they could listen to half the phone calls. In fact, anybody who made a phone call in the house, they could hear the call. They could hear who's making the call because he's talking, but they couldn't hear what was being said on the phone. Michael Scheuer, who's the deputy, who's the chief of Alex Station, learns of this communications conduit through a CIA officer, a liaison detailed to the NSA stationed overseas. The NSA officer is not publicly known, however, but the CIA begins to press the NSA to release cables regarding the incoming calls. Scheuer wants to have the other half. He already has one half, wants the other half. But he was given the runaround by the NSA. They promised him that they'll give him a trickle effect of information, but they never shared anything. And the CIA never held up their end of the bargain by providing human intelligence reports or CIRs, or photographs of the people who were in the home, which the NSA really wanted, so they could put a face to the name. Scheuer, in December of 1996, then goes to the deputy director of the NSA, Barbara McNamara, and complains to her and tells her to send the other half of the cables, and she wouldn't budge. And she would end up going to the legal counsel of the NSA and threaten legal action against Scheuer if they compromised the operation. Scheuer is not one to back down, but he backed down here, knowing that having half of the cables is better than not having anything at all. On February 8, 1998, a group calling itself the World Islamic Front issues a second fatwa by Bin Laden, which involved a number of individuals you probably heard of. Ayman al-Zawahiri, emir of the Egyptian Islamic Jihad and the second to al-Qaeda, and Abu Rafai Taha, one of the co-founders of the Egyptian Islamic Jihad. The fatwa was more pronounced, and this time was more personal, because this fatwa declared that the U.S. and Israel, including their citizens, could now be executed by any Muslim around the world at any time. And so here we have an individual with a small group of terrorists, al-Qaeda, declaring war on a superpower. And the NSA the CIA took this seriously. And in December of 98, George Tenet basically declared war on al-Qaeda. I didn't know that a terrorist group without any structure or government or military of its own can declare an act of war against a country, and for a country's primary intelligence service to declare war on a non-state. It's a first in history. And through the NSA's monitoring of bin Laden's satellite phone and now the house in Yemen, they began to monitor calls between high-level al-Qaeda operatives like Mohammed Atef, al-Qaeda military commander, and Wadi al-Hajj, the personal financier. This is just months before he was arrested. And this was between the months January and February of 1998. What was being said on these calls and the many, probably thousands before it and afterwards, is not shared with any investigative agency or federal, local, state law enforcement in the world. The NSA has this. El Hajj then traveled to Pakistan in February and contacts Kenyan operatives there, in which the calls monitor El Hajj giving an address of a hotel in Peshawar where he's staying. The NSA heard this. On February 7th, he ended up calling an Al Qaeda cell member in Kenya by the name of Fazul Abdullah Muhammad. But the Alex station heard the other half of that phone call. And so they contacted the FBI because they were investigating the Cobra Towers bombing, and they were investigating Al Qaeda links inside the United States. CIA doesn't operate inside the United States, allegedly. And so the FBI decided to interview Wadi al-Hajj in Kenya. In fact, it was Dan Coleman from the I-49 unit, which is the counterterrorism unit headed by John O'Neill and Jack Clunan. Dan Coleman, one of the original members, in which that information was shared by Alex Station and the NSA, where Wadi al-Hajj was staying at. The FBI had no idea. But because, like I said, the NSA and CIA were listening to the phone calls in Yemen, they decided to contact Coleman and send Wadi al-Hajj and send him to interview Wadi al-Hajj. So the staff at the I-49 unit really thought that Wadi al-Hajj could be turned and that he could provide valuable information to the FBI about Bin Laden because they wanted to know more about him. So when they went to his house in Kenya, he basically was non-cooperative. So they decided to get a warrant, and when they went back to his house, they take his computer and his personal belongings, and they find a slew of incriminating evidence after decrypting what was in the computer. They found a letter that was written by al-Hajj when he was in East Africa, and it was about Al-Qaeda and to talk about a global caliphate starting from the Sudan to Afghanistan and operations inside the United States. And what I'll do is I'll read you a quote which was taken off of Wadi al-Hajj's computer and was used to prosecute him for his role in the 1998 East Africa bombings. Bring it up. Quote, "The second matter is that I would recommend to the good and wise Supreme Commander, which I implore to God to keep safe, to work hard, to return the caliphate to earth and fight the forces of atheism and dictators who wreaked havoc on earth. We, the East Africa cell members, do not want to know about the operation plans since we are just implementers. We trust our command and appreciate their work and know that they have a lot of problems. But my advice here is for the practical part, only since we started the project for reestablishing the Muslim state, which is a collective effort and not an individual one. We are all part of it," end quote. Oh, and let me read the fatwa that was in the computer. Quote, "As you know, the decision to declare war in America was taken, and we only know about it from the media, and we should have known about the decision, and the decision only, and not the plans, so that we could take the necessary precautions and to prevent causing us any complications or failure in your plans due to the ignorance of them," end quote. Now, I noticed that in the 9/11 truth movement and with fringe conspiracy circles that the intelligence agencies basically make up evidence, and these groups are basically um, CIA operatives, or they're basically fictitious, or they're patsies and whatnot. That's not true. These groups are real groups. These are real people that want to do harm. The real conspiracy is that what I just read to you was known by the intelligence services. This is the reason why I do some of these live videos, so I could tell you in simple terms about the intelligence apparatuses collecting information. Information is power. It can destroy kings and queens. I mean, we're seeing that in the Epstein trial or the Maxwell trial, in which they wanted to blackmail high level, high powered world leaders, actors, athletes, in the hopes of what? Procuring information, manipulating these people, maybe for intelligence purposes, or maybe for their own agendas. But blackmail is about information or money. And with the intelligence apparatuses, they can manipulate operations before they even happen, or maybe allow them to happen altogether to achieve a greater geopolitical goal, which would involve the intelligence agencies in the future and the expansion thereof. That's a lot more plausible, and that's evident throughout human history. It's not that they wanted this to happen, they allowed it to happen. And it could, who knows what these guys were saying on the phone? And nobody talks about the NSA whatsoever. Can you imagine what Al Qaeda was speaking on that satellite phone to Bin Laden and the house in Yemen? Every day, the NSA were listening to those calls. Every day for 3 years prior to 9/11, the CIA heard what was going on in that house. I hope you understand where I'm trying to go with it. So, the FBI, which was monitoring Khaled al-Fawwaz inside the United States and had the Islamic American Relief Agency on the radar screen, because Khalil, like I said, is one of the regional directors. Now his phone is also being monitored by the FBI. And he continues to purchase minutes for Bin Laden's satellite phone until 1998, where Bin Laden gets rid of the satellite phone. On August 5th, 1998, the NSA picks up 2 calls from a person inside the Yemen hub, the Yemen house. This individual is Khaled al-Mihdhar. Khaled al-Mihdhar is known to the NSA as Khaled, and the CIA knows him as Khaled. And they know that he has connections with the East Africa bombings. The calls are made from a different house because Ahmed al-Hada receives the calls from Khaled al-Mihdhar to Ahmed al-Hada. The NSA also listens to another call to Bin Laden's home to Khaled al-Fawwaz. And he's told by someone using Bin Laden's phone regarding a plan to bomb U.S. embassies in Tanzania and Kenya. Remember what I just told you about what they could have been talking about on those phones? Well, here it is. Why isn't nobody talking about this? Instead, you have the 9/11 truth movement beset by fringe conspiracies such as no planes and no hijackers and mini nukes in the basement of the World Trade Center, or Judy Wood and the space beams from outer space. That's 2 days prior to the embassy bombings. Because on August 7, 1998, two U.S. embassies are bombed in Kenya and Tanzania. How the hell did the CIA and the NSA, which were monitoring the Yemen hub, how did they miss this crucial operation? How is it possible? Were they not talking about this on the phone? Well, according to John Miller of ABC News, in his book, The Cell, published in 2002, which, by the way, I would recommend getting. It's a short read, but it's fantastic. John Miller comes highly recommended. And I'll read you a quote from the book. Quote, what has become clear with time is that the facets of the East Africa plot had been known beforehand to the FBI, the CIA, the State Department, and to Israeli and Kenyan intelligence. No one can seriously argue that the horrors of August 7, 1998 couldn't have been prevented, end quote. He also relates in his book that it's highly improbable that the NSA or the CIA could not have known about this, since they were closely monitoring Bin Laden and the Yemen hub at this point. And I'll read you another quote. Quote, and this is coming from the book again. Inexplicable as the intelligence failure was, more baffling still was that Al-Qaeda correctly presumed that a major attack could be carried out by a cell that the U.S. agents had already uncovered, end quote. What is he talking about there? He's talking about the intelligence services that were monitoring Bin Laden on land and in signals intelligence. Human intelligence, signals intelligence. They had the information. And I talked about al-Hawali, that by his own admission, he backed out of the truck and the truck exploded because there was a driver. He was the martyrdom operator. And when al-Hawali ran away from the truck, he had suffered shrapnel and burns on his back, and he went to the hospital. And he was seen using a phone. So Kenya authorities were contacted because they noticed about the bombing, which wasn't very far. They noticed his burns. They put two and two together. So the FBI was notified about al-Hawali's arrest by Kenyan authorities. So they sent John Anticept, like I said before, in which he went into the room alone and talked with al-Hawali. And after some pleasant chat, al-Hawali basically gave him the phone number to the Yemen hub. And I'll read you an LA Times report from August 28, 1998. Quote, in his confession, al-Hawali also said he had attended conferences and meetings with Bin Laden, as well as a press conference Bin Laden held in May in Khost, Afghanistan. Al-Hawali said he was aware Bin Laden had issued an edict described as a fatwa or religious order urging Muslims to kill Americans, the affidavit said, end quote. That's how he was chosen for the operation. These guys are expendable. That's what they are. However, what's even more shocking, and you're not going to believe this, and this is going to be really, because I don't think you're aware of this, because it was such a non-story at the time. And this was brought to my attention from my co-host of The Dark and Hour, Richard Cox. Bless his heart, because this was when I heard it, it made I was shocked. My jaw was open. During the trial of Muhammad al-Awali, the number to the most important house, the most surveilled home in the world, in which the NSA, the CIA, and God knows who else was monitoring it, the phone number 967 1 200578 became public record. And it was published by an article from The Guardian in 1998, as soon as that became public, because it was used in trial of al-Awali. Can you? That's incredible. The Al Qaeda communications hub, the number published in 1998 in The Guardian, without the knowledge of Al Qaeda. Incredible. Shocking. They still use the phone. So in 1999, the NSA learns about a phone call in which they hear names called, they knew about Khaled, but then they heard the name Nawaf and Salem. And that the other person on the end of that line was named Khaled. And that there was going to be a high-level meeting that was going to take place. But first, they were talking on the phone with Khaled. And later it became known that Nawaf was Nawaf al-Hazmi. And Salem was his brother, Salem al-Hazmi. And what was talked about on the phone was that Khaled had thanked Khaled and Nawaf and Salem for their participation in the embassy bombings. Now, this is huge because now they have a connection to a crime, a federal crime, because it happened with a federal U.S. building, U.S. embassy. The NSA doesn't pass this information to the FBI. Huge red flag here. The warnings, they were already there, according to Kenyan intelligence. But federal and global intelligence agencies denied that they knew the details of the attacks. Now, yeah, we don't have written work. We don't have any reports, CIR reports, Central Intelligence reports, right? Because the NSA has classified all their data. Now, this is why, for me anyway, I think this would be a great idea. I know it's a pipe dream, but I want to file a freedom of information request about all the phone calls that were transcribed by the NSA at Bin Laden's satellite phone and the Yemen hub. Now, yeah, that's a pipe dream and a half. Now, I remember messaging Thomas Drake about what it would take to do that, and he messaged me and said that I would. He suspected that the sources and methods will get in the way under Exemption 1 under Executive Order 13528 with respect to foreign intelligence. Now, a good friend of mine, who's a great researcher, Ed Brotherton of We Are Change LA, formerly of We Are Change LA, he went up and, since he's a constitutional expert, he looked up the definition of Executive Order 13526 because it's foreign intelligence. He's right, but what is the declassification methods? And I found out that after 25 years, the NSA has to declassify whatever reports that were made. So that would mean that the NSA's CIA reports regarding Bin Laden's satellite phone can be made available unless they're classified, because we still have a Guantanamo Bay trial pending. I'm debating whether to do it, but I know that this would be the backbreaker of the case, because what I'm trying to say is that if the NSA heard about an operation like, say, 9/11 on the phone and didn't warn anybody, well, guess what? If we could declassify those transcripts and show that, that would be the end of the NSA. On the other hand, if Al Qaeda wasn't talking about 9/11 on those phones, we can process that as, hey, they weren't involved. And who were they? And why wasn't this data shared with the FBI or State Department? Plausible, but who knows? After Wadi al-Hajj is prosecuted for his role in the East Africa bombings, his wife, April el-Hajj, who lives in Houston, basically went to the media and showed her vitriol for the State Department in prosecuting her husband, which was based on really flimsy evidence, actually. He was a bookkeeper. And yeah, he made some derogatory remarks about wishing to attack the United States, but he got a life sentence. However, something more illuminating came about the East Africa bombings. And I'm going to read you a very valuable quote made by, I always get her name wrong, Prudence Bushnell, who is the U.S. ambassador to Kenya. And she went on to write in an article about the East Africa bombings. In which there was a civil case litigating between the U.S. ambassador and the investigators. And she wrote, and she said that in 1999, and I'll read you the quote, "Let me be blunt. Last year, when this mission raised the vulnerability of the previous embassy bombing or previous embassy building, we received informal feedback that some people in Washington thought we were overreacting." So, remember, there was a Khobar Towers bombing in '96. There was a threat in an embassy, threat to an embassy bombing in early '98, and so the warnings were there. And Prudence Bushnell wrote a scathing letter to the FBI, to the CIA, got no feedback, tried to warn her counterparts in the State Department about advancing or implementing stricter security measures in the U.S. embassies in Africa. And they wrote back to her saying, "You're overreacting." Well, guess what happened? Ali Mohammed, who I spoke about before, who's a triple agent for the CIA, the FBI, and also to Bin Laden, he basically was arrested for his role in the East Africa bombings in 2000. And he told the federal investigators that it was him who took photographs of the security boots of the buildings at East Africa, in Tanzania, in Kenya. He did that. And he reported to Bin Laden under the full knowledge of the FBI and CIA, mind you. Yeah, everyone's watching here. This is not like the fox came sneaking in the hen house. The intelligence agencies had enormous information. And then when they testify regarding the after effects of the event, whether it be East Africa bombings or the 1993 World Trade Center bombing or the 9/11 attacks, in the committees, in the hearings, it's always they're crying broke. We didn't have enough manpower. We didn't have enough money. If we did, this wouldn't happen. We need to ensure the security of Americans. Well, I'm telling you right here, right now, they had the information. They could have stopped it. Now, the book that Bushnell wrote was Terrorism, Betrayal, and Resilience, My Story of the 1998 U.S. Embassy Bombings. And I do have that book in Amazon. I've not read it, so I can't talk about it. But the book in which Bushnell, she questions why thousands of injured Kenyans did not receive medical compensation from the American government. And not only that, why the CIA and the FBI refused to share critical intelligence that could have prevented the tragedy, including the NSA listening to the phone calls of Bin Laden, because months later he gets rid of it. I think it's a month later. No, I'm sorry, 2 months later, November, he gets rid of it. And the Yemen hub, as well as having a contact, an informant, Ali Mohammed. Khaled al-Fawwaz is actually arrested in Britain, along with 6 others, for being involved with their alleged participation at the senior level regarding the East Africa embassy bombings. And that operation was called Operation Challenge. And they arrested a number of people inside the United States and the United Kingdom. And Fawaz and others were suspected of being involved with al-Jihad. But al-Fawaz was later convicted for being involved in the attacks, and he got a life sentence inside the United States in 2015. Excuse me. Bin Laden, all of a sudden, the NSA becomes aware that Bin Laden is not active on the phone. There's no activity on the phone. So they lose track. According to the White House press secretary at the time, Sarah Sanders, press secretary for Bill Clinton, it was the media, specifically the Washington Post, who reported the story that the NSA were listening in on Bin Laden's phone calls. Quote, one of the worst cases was the reporting on the U.S. ability to listen to Osama Bin Laden's satellite phone in the late 1990s. Because of that reporting, he stopped using that phone and the country lost valuable intelligence, end quote. That's not true. Sanders fibbed. Bin Laden got rid of the phone because Fawaz is arrested. He no longer could provide minutes. That's for one. 2, he got rid of the phone because out of his brain, he thought that the phone was being monitored. Well, they were monitoring that phone since 1996, so they heard 2 years and 2.5 years worth of phone calls without him knowing. Meanwhile, the phone number to the Yemen hub is public knowledge because it's reported in The Guardian. Nobody knows nothing. According to CIA officials, it was from an August 17, 1998 Washington Post story that triggered Bin Laden's decision to stop using the satellite phone. But that turned out to be not true at all. At the same time, because Shoya was so insular and wasn't being a team player with the CIA, he's replaced as station chief of Alex Station. In comes a more corporate guy, a guy who is actually implemented by Director Tenet, and it's Richard Blee. His father's a legend in East Africa counterterrorism, and that's his son followed his father's footsteps. He becomes the head chief of station of Alex Station, and Bin Laden positions Kofor Black as the new counterterrorism director. Some major changes are made. They want aggressive people involved with implementation of operations and working well with the counterterrorism unit. And it's that year when George Tenet basically declares war on Al Qaeda. Okay. Oh, sorry. I just saw your text in the room. I won't hit the desk. Thank you for that. So the Counterterrorism Center ran a clandestine type of operation called the Plan, which called for covert operations to have to implement special forces teams from the Special Activities Division of the CIA into Afghanistan and monitor Bin Laden from a short distance and monitor the training camps like Khaled and Al Farouk and Tannak Farms. Because of the NSA's monitoring of Ziyad Khalil's phone, they monitored him. They began an operation inside of Jordan because he relocated to Jordan. And on December 29th, 1999, Jordanian authorities arrested Ziyad Khalil. And they also found out he had been helping Hamas through the Islamic Association for Palestine group. And with the help of the FBI, they link him to more notable Islamic mosque, which was a refugee center, which I talked about many times, Al-Qifa in Brooklyn, next door to the Al Farouk Mosque, which was basically run by Omar Abdel Rahman. Al-Qifa is the extension of the Maktab al-Khidmat in Peshawar, Pakistan. It's actually the only office that's inside the United States. It's an actual room. The egregious operation by the NSA, broad, expansive, huge, and it would make you understand how the NSA could be overwhelmed with information. Metadata, if you're not understanding of it, really takes time to transcribe, to basically understand, to research what's in the CIA reports. Takes a lot. Now, just imagine how many phone calls are made during a day. Now, imagine a week, a month, a year, years. You can only imagine. U.S., according to Richard Sale, the United Press International reporter, Richard Sale, he would publish a report about the enormous amount of metadata the NSA had collected over the years, monitoring Al Qaeda throughout the world. And I'll read you a quote from him. Quote, the United States has scored notable successes in an information war against the organization of terrorist suspect Osama bin Laden. U.S. hackers have gone into foreign bank accounts and deleted or transferred money and jammed or blocked the group's cell or satellite phones all over the world. End quote. Enormous. So they know about Al Qaeda's financing operations. They know about the intricate plans and details of operations. They know about the structure of Al Qaeda. So they basically know almost everything about this group, everything about this individual, and nobody says nothing. So let's go back to 1999. It's the NSA who begins learning about the name Nawaf al-Hazmi in full. They knew as Nawaf. Now they have a last name, Nawaf al-Hazmi. This is 1999. They learned this while they were monitoring the Yemen hub. They never shared this with the CIA, who's now running operations there. They're the lead agency involving the Yemen hub. The NSA gives an excuse and say that it wasn't necessary to share this information with anyone, as it didn't meet with NSA guidelines to share personal data that they retrieve in their CIA reports with any investigative agency, federal or foreign. They also learned about Khalid al-Midar's full name, Khalid al-Midar. This is 2 years prior to 9/11. However, that information is shared with Alex Station. It wasn't freely given. And I'll tell you why they did it. They also don't tell him that he has a close connection to Nawaf al-Hazmi either, because they don't know anything about Nawaf al-Hazmi, the CIA. Now, as they were monitoring the calls between Khalid al-Midar and Nawaf al-Hazmi throughout the beginning of the year, throughout the end of 1999, they are speaking with a high-powered al-Qaeda operative. And the identity of the person he's talking to and the content of those specific intercepts. It's so sensitive that the passages and the transcripts are redacted in the 9/11's inquiry report, joint inquiry. This would be the 28 pages. And the NSA never shared any of this with any agency prior to 9/11. After learning about the full names of Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Midar, a series of calls were made on December 29, 1999, which were heard by the NSA. And the other person on the end of the line is known as Khaled. And they were talking about a very high-level meeting taking place in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and that they wanted Khalid and Nawaf to attend, as well as Salim al-Hazmi. They learned his full name now at this point. The NSA wanted to share this information because they wanted the human intelligence CIA reports of the CIA, in which they were going to take pictures of everybody that's going to attend. And there were a number of very high-powered terrorists into this meeting. And I'm going to name some of them. The meeting would take place in a condo that was owned by Yazid Sufat, who's a business owner in Malaysia and also a member of the terrorist group Jemaat Islamiyah. Between January 5th and January 8th of 2000, the CIA contacted Malaysian authorities and told them to take photographs of everybody that attends, and it's alleged that they took video. Now, we don't know whether there was audio, whether the condo was bugged, but what we do know for sure that they took photographs and they took video. The video shot by Malaysian authorities either wasn't shared with the CIA. We don't know. The CIA doesn't say anything about it. But we do know that they took photographs of a number of people, including Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Ridwan Isamuddin, who goes by the name Hambali, co-leader of Jeddah Islamiyah, Nawaf al-Hazmi, Khalid al-Midar, Salim al-Hazmi, Ramzi bin al-Shib, Tawfiq bin Atash, Khaled, Abu Bara al-Taziri, Fahad al-Kuso, and Abid al-Rahim al-Nashiri. Now, most of those names you heard of. They were involved with a number of different operations. For example, al-Nashiri is alleged to have been involved with the USS Cole bombing. He's also mercilessly tortured. And Fahad al-Qusso, who also had participation in the USS Cole bombing. Ridwan Samuddin is a notorious bomber of Southeast Asia and had links to the 2002 Bali bombings. So they took photographs of a lot of these people. The CIA, again, doesn't share this information with the NSA, doesn't share this with the FBI, doesn't share this with the State Department. So they hoard the information. The NSA becomes really dissatisfied with CIA, and they have no, it's like they don't know what to do. But however, at the same time, the CIA is also dissatisfied with the NSA for not sharing their information to the CIA. And the FBI is equally or just as much dissatisfied with the CIA and the NSA because they wouldn't share information to the FBI. So it's one big circle jerk. Agencies complaining about other agencies not sharing information, even though they all had an enormous amount of information. But like I said to you before, information is power. And power is addicting. The photographs are shared with Alex Station. The Malaysian authorities do share that they send a fax. The CIA also breaks into a hotel room in which Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Mihdhar were staying in, and they take photographs of his passport. So now, on the passport is the dual U.S. visas I talked about previously before. So all this information is shared with the CIA. The CIA now has information and the faces to go with it of Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi. And like I said before, Doug Miller, who's an FBI case officer out of New York, assigned to Alex Station, he read the cable about al-Hazmi possessing a U.S. visa, a dual U.S. visa. And he's coming to the United States, and he tried to share that information with the FBI and was not allowed to share it. And on January 15th, 2001, Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi entered the United States. But right before that, this is important. When they left the meeting, Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, according to Richard Blee, the station chief of Alex Station, he went to a national principals meeting, which was catered by the Secretary of State, the National Security Advisor, the Counterterrorism Czar, Richard Clark, Joint Chiefs of Staff, Richard Myers, and says, we lost them. However, the NSA didn't, because the NSA is still listening to the cell phone of Nawaf al-Hazmi. Thanks, in part, to the NSA listening to the phone calls of the Yemen hub. So now the NSA knows about them coming to the United States. The CIA, because they had the passports, photographs of the passport, and the U.S. visa of Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Mihdhar, knew they were coming to the United States. Did they share that with the State Department principals meeting? Did they share that with the FBI? Nope. But the NSA had a one-upper on the CIA because the NSA were listening to phone calls made by Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi inside the United States, in which they made 6 phone calls while they were living with an informant of the FBI in California, in which I did a live video discussion on regarding Abdussadah Sheikh, who was given a code name Stan by the San Diego FBI. It was almost like all these guys involved with 9/11 were right behind it was the intelligence services. We're not talking about on the days before 9/11. We're not talking about the weeks before that. We're talking about years. Years here. And I'm not going to talk about 9/11 and stuff. I mean, I've done live discussions before, but what I'm going to read to you in the final part of this video. Oh, I'm going to talk about a little bit about the programs too. I have to. This is important. But I'm going to read you an excerpt from an interview between former senior executive of the NSA Thomas Drake and Barbara Kopel of The Nation in 2013. I shouldn't describe. I should just let you hear it. I should just let you. I'm not going to ruin it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read you the transcription. Barbara Kopel, what did you tell the Saxby-Chambliss Congressional Subcommittee and the Congressional Joint Inquiry? Drake, I can't say fully because it's classified, but I showed that the NSA knew a great deal about the 9/11 threat and Al Qaeda electronically tracking various people and organizations for years, since its role is to collect intelligence. The problem is, it wasn't sharing all of the data. If it had, other parts of government could have acted on it, and more than likely, the NSA could have stopped. I say stopped 9/11 from even happening. Later, it could have located Al Qaeda at the very time the US was scoring Afghanistan. It's true that there were systematic failures throughout the intelligence system, but the NSA was a critical piece of it. I gave both committees prima facie evidence with documents. One was as early 2001 NSA internal detailed multi-year study of Al Qaeda and sympathetic groups, movements that revealed what the NSA knew, could have done, and should have done. It was astonishingly well analyzed current intelligence. Soon after 9/11, some NSA analysts called me about it. Why? Because they were pulling their hair out, knowing that they had this information and they couldn't get NSA leadership to share the report with the rest of the intelligence community, even though it's mandatory. It was actionable information. Remember the time period. We were in the early part of the war in Afghanistan. People needed to act on it to unravel Al Qaeda networks. But NSA leaders deliberately, I repeat, deliberately, decided not to disseminate it. So the analysis about what it knew before and after 9/11 got buried very deeply because it would really have made them look bad. In fact, after the analysts called me to complain, I told my superior, Maureen Baginski, the director of signals intelligence, who was the number 3 person with NSA, instead of acting on it, she got mad at me and said, Tom, I wish you'd never brought this file to my attention. Barbara Kopel. Why? Thomas Drake. Because she no longer had plausible deniability. End quote. Now, I say to you, remarkable information, overwhelming information. regarding the NSA monitoring Bin Laden's satellite phone and the Yemen hub. The NSA was running a project. I'll talk about these projects very generally, though. A project called ThinThread, which was an intelligence gathering project by the United States NSA program conducted throughout the 1990s. And the program involved wiretapping and sophisticated analysis of the resulting data. But the program was discontinued 3 weeks before 9/11. And this came on the bureaucrats of the NSA. It was due to the changes in priorities and the consolidation of the U.S. intelligence authority, which subsequently changed overnight on September 11, 2001. The reason why there was a change in priority because the NSA the NSA director, General Michael Hayden, went with a concept called Trailblazer. The Trailblazer program had a ton of money behind it. The ThinThread program didn't have much in the way of anyone behind it. So, in other words, you have outside corporate sponsors supporting the Trailblazer project, which was a program intended to develop a capability to analyze data carried on communication networks like the internet. And it was meant to track entities using communication methods such as monitoring phone calls and emails without a warrant. ThinThread program had to come with a warrant. All that changed after 9/11. Thomas Drake, like I said, the former senior executive of the NSA, became really indignant regarding the problems he saw at the NSA. That instead of working together and stopping terrorism, he saw some senior officials at the NSA making really surprising remarks, including Maureen Baginski, who he said during a meeting with the principals of the NSA, saying 9/11 was a gift to NSA. We can milk this thing for years. That's a direct quote. Thomas Drake said he heard Maureen Baginski say that. Soon after the 9/11 attacks, the White House legal counsel contacted the NSA and said, what could we do to monitor operatives inside the United States? And Director Hayden, in a Nightline documentary called The Spy Factory, basically says we need to go to the dark side. In other words, no restrictions, no warrants. We need the information and we need it now, without any restrictions, without any walls, without any rules and regulations, protected by the federal and state agencies, institutions of government. And Bush basically not only broke down federal laws, but state laws. Broke the FISA laws and gave the NSA freedom to collect emails, phone calls, text messages from not just citizens across borders, but most importantly, inside the United States. later on, the data collection was so enormous by the NSA, they built a station called the Utah Data Center, which is a storage facility, a data storage facility located in Pine Bluff, Utah, near Camp Williams. It cost $1.5 billion to build. Now, I ask you people in the room, have you ever heard of this place? Now that you have, I want you to ask your friends and family, what is the Utah Data Center? The Utah Data Center has the capability to collect all forms of communication, complete contents of emails, phone calls, internet, text messages, parking receipts, travel itineraries, bookstore purchases, anything that has to do with digital information. The place is so powerful. It used so much electricity. The first day it opened, it knocked out the electricity for half of Utah. That's how big this place is. It's amazing. The programs that the NSA runs now, programs like Prism, Echelon, X Keyscore, which was all basically revealed under the Snowden documents release in 2011. Programs that the NSA runs with the full autonomy from the White House and the FBI. This is no longer about a war on terrorism. It's a war on information. That's what this exactly is. And now that they have our information, the next step is to act on it. And start suspending communication between us. Aren't we seeing that now online? With the cooperation of Google, Facebook, YouTube, restricting accounts for not saying the right words, standards, abuse of standards, whatever that is, abuse of standards. I got 2 strikes on my channel. In fact, I got 1 lifted because I spoke about debating on 9/11 conspiracy theorist, and I didn't even curse in the video. And they said it was bullying. We're at this time in our lives where the pressure is not coming off the neck. It's getting worse. And so we're either going to stop it or we're not. But that's the NSA monitoring Bin Laden and Al Qaeda, the information that they had and never shared, which is repeated by former employees of the NSA, who, by the way, Thomas Drake was arrested by the NSA for revealing public information to the Baltimore Sun about the NSA's egregious crimes against the American people. On a level worse than when Nixon did in the 1970s in the Watergate scandal. Actually, Thomas Drake told the Baltimore Sun he reviewed the laws regarding disclosure of information and decided that if he revealed unclassified information, the worst thing that could happen to him was he would be fired. That would be right. And he told them about unclassified information. The NSA decided no, we're not going to just fire him. We're going to arrest him. And in July of 2007, the FBI arrested not just Thomas Drake, but also others who spoke out about the NSA's illegal programs against Americans. People like Diane Rourke, J. Kirk Wiebe, Ed Loomis, and Bill Binney. Those guys were the ones who filed a Department of Defense Inspector General report and complaint. And when they were arrested, they arrested Bill Binney, who actually is in a wheelchair. He was in his shower, and the FBI came to his shower head and pulled guns on him. But they were never charged with any crimes later. But the message was clear. Thomas Drake was worse. They charged him with the Espionage Act, in which only, I think, 3 or 4 people in the United States were ever charged with it, including the infamous Rosenbergs, which carried basically a life sentence. The Rosenbergs were executed for it. And Drake he had to spend like $1 million in lawyers. And through the help of Jesselyn Radack, and the Government Accountability Project, he basically pled to a small charge of I forgot the charge it was, but he was not charged with the more serious offenses. And what this did was basically break him financially, because that's what they wanted to do. And Thomas Drake is a hero. I mean, he's one of the most admirable people I've ever read about. Now, you've heard about, whistleblowers and heroes. Yeah, but Thomas Drake really meets the requirements and deserves the accolades. And he now as time passes, nobody even remembers the name I come across. And I'll never, ever forget what he's done and what they tried to do. It's hard to be a whistleblower these days. It really is. But that's the end of the video, because I'll just rant after this. I want to do that. You got better things to do. Hopefully the video was educational for you. And thanks, Ecom, if you're still here, about reminding me to do the live video. I totally forgot all about it. But this was something that was on my mind for a little bit. I wanted to do because it's the one agency nobody talks about regarding the metadata. And now you can see why. Why the 9/11 Commission, why the Joint House Inquiry, why they didn't investigate the NSA or learn anything from the NSA was because they had all the data. And if they shared that with the intelligence agencies or the State Department, they could have stopped 9/11. Now, that's not me telling it to you. That's Thomas Drake, who worked for the NSA. And I believe it. And so, guys, have a good night and see you at the next live video.